Have you ever watched an old film and thought, I wonder how long it must have taken to put all that together? Considering they used strips of films in the past. A lot of people these days think that film has died out and that we save all our clips on hard drives and memory sticks. But to this day, famous films still use the cameras with the film strips in them. These are called celluloid cameras. As you can see in this clip, The Wolf of Wall Street has been filmed on a camera with a film strip. But the cost of using these cameras and film strips is wildly expensive, and it's a lot cheaper these days to go digital. But if they have access to a camera like this, then why would they still use a camera that looks like this? When you first watch a film, nobody thinks that it's done on a film strip or one of those old film cameras. But you'd be wrong. Some of your favourite films are recorded on celluloid. Django, Slumdog Millionaire, hell, even Avatar. But why would they go through all the cost and trouble just to film on a film strip? Have you ever tried cutting up a film strip and putting it together? It's harder than it looks, trust me. I mean, look at all that complication. I can never work out how to use that thing. So have you ever worked on film and digital in the past?
I've worked on certainly digital, never worked with analogue film.
With film, I suppose it's got to be back to the 1970s. That's quite a long time, yes. It's a long time, yeah.
Obviously, I've been doing it just like you guys are now on a course, if that makes sense, since sort of 2004.
Yeah.
So just over 10 years. But doing it professionally, if you like, probably since 2008, 2009.
So have you worked on both digital and film, or have you just worked with digital?
Unfortunately, I've only worked with digital. All the productions I've been on have shot on digital.
Most of my time I've been working as a kind of more film theorist, so I've been more critical, but I have actually used practical film-making equipment for some time. So I suppose I started, apart from kind of doing amateur stuff before that, I suppose I started using cameras with students in the 1970s again, so that's quite a long time. And obviously at that stage it was only celluloid.
Do you have a favourite? Do you prefer film or do you prefer digital, and why?
I don't have a particular favourite. I think digital is good because it's so flexible, it's so easy to edit. You can do quite a lot of post-production with digital, filters and that kind of thing. So you can simulate a lot of the effects that you get with analogue.
If I had an option, I would rather film on celluloid because I prefer at the minute the look you get. Okay, I prefer the warmth, the grit of it. Watching films, likewise, still celluloid, but I think digital's come a long way over the last couple of years.
The point of view of using it with students and making your own film, there's no question about it, digital is much better, much easier to use. For a number of reasons. One reason is that when you shoot something, you get an immediate feedback. You can take it along to a computer. You can actually do the editing. So you can it's a continuous process.
Obviously there are a lot of people who swear by analogue and use old school film. Certain directors use it still in film, but usually in television, I think they're mostly going over to, or have gone over to digital.
When I started, you would make a film, you make it on celluloid, you'd then send it away to a laboratory for processing. It might be a week or two before you got it back. By that stage, your students had lost interest in what they were doing. Yeah. Then the actual physical business of celluloid editing is really hard. It's and you've got to get it right first time. You get it wrong first time, you've got to undo it and do it again. And that's really hard because you're actually cutting bits of thing. It's not like moving stuff on Premiere, which is very, very easy. So from that point of view, there's no question that digital is an improvement, both from the point of view of teaching it, but also from the point of view of doing it at that kind of level without sophisticated equipment and lots of money.
What difference do you see between watching a film in digital and watching a film in film?
That's a different argument.
Yeah.
So the argument there is in terms of my choice of watching films, and I think probably I may belong to one of the last generations of people who really do have preferences in that way. There's two issues here. One is actually the projection of the film, and secondly is actually what the film's been shot on. I still maintain that the projection of the film is inferior on digital to what it is on celluloid, which is strange because now it's very hard to actually see a film on celluloid projection. So when I go and see a film, certainly if I go and see a film which I think has got fairly high production values, I notice a difference and I feel uncomfortable at the moment still with digital.
I must admit now, over the last couple of years, the difference is getting fewer. There's not as much difference as there used to be. But up until recently, the difference was that the quality that you were seeing was a warmer, more what I call cinematic look, that you can see the grain, the contrast between dark and light was so much better than what you were getting from digital. And digital looked too false.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't looking artistic, is the word I would use.
I was talking to one of the other teachers earlier, and he was talking about how digital films make films fake in a way, visually. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. I'm not sure whether it's to do with digital as such. It's certainly to do with certain digital film production techniques.
Yeah.
And certainly my view is that a lot of CGI seems to have a degree of artificiality and doesn't have authenticity. Again, if I can just give an example, which I found interesting. I watched, in a fairly short period of time, two films. One was Avatar, multi-million budget, all the resources of new technology, all the resources on the elaborative set. I'm personally, I suffer from vertigo. Now, you might expect a film like Avatar, I'd be screaming and yelling. I can't actually cope with it. I had no feeling of height or tall. Then I watched a film called Man on the Wire. Man on the Wire is a film shot on 16mm of a guy who walked from one towers to the other on a tightrope. And I could scarcely watch it. Yeah, I kept on, no, he's going to fall. And if the camera even slightly tinted to slope downwards, I had a real problem with that. So at that level, here is all the technology put in something which I found more artificial. I think it's also true of 3D. I think 3D is very artificial. You might think, well, the world, we experience our world in 3D. But actually, 3D film watching is a very artificial experience, I think, in general. It doesn't, for me, work in that way. And it's proved it, because actually the kind of films that get shown on 3D tend to be animation, tend to be fantasy. And so it's reconciled itself to being a spectacular, but not a realist form.
I was watching two scenes earlier, for example. Django obviously was shot on film, and the scene where he's shooting in Candyland, it looks like it wasn't shot on film.
Yeah.
And then if you look at a film like Once Upon a Time in Mexico, you get the same scene, sets it in a church obviously, but he's shooting everyone, it looks the same scene.
Yeah.
Pretty much like...
I think Robert Rodriguez, who directed Once Upon a Time in Mexico, obviously he's somebody who champions digital and has helped move it along a long way. I will say, as good as that looks, that scene, against something like Django, I think it does, in my opinion, the whole film looks slightly dated now in comparison. And the problem is with digital that's been shot up until recently, is that is the response. It is starting to look dated, and it doesn't hold up against those other films.
When you saw both those films,
Yeah.
did you see them in the cinema?
I've seen Django in cinema. I was a bit too young to see the other one in cinema.
Well, in which case, I mean, if you take it down to television level, then I suspect actually the difference is fairly minimal.
Yeah.
I think it will be hard to tell that difference. And that really comes down to what we want with our films. I mean, I reckon now, let me think. I reckon I probably see about 20 films in the cinema a year. So I probably go every other week. I go to the cinema. The average person in this country sees 88 films a year in any format. I'm quite a heavy cinema goer. I've never counted it up. I must see at least 150 films a year, if you think about it. And that's obviously on television. So really, my experience of watching films on cinema is only a very small proportion of the films I actually see. And what I'm saying, I suppose, is that I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference, even though I've got a fairly decent television set with cinema surround sound, that kind of thing. I'm not sure it's going to make that much difference what format I see it on. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm being a bit picky because I actually like to see certain films on the big screen. I like to see them projected digitally, analog on celluloid, but that's the exception.
Do you think film is dying out then, pretty much?
I don't know whether it's dying out yet, because I think there are a lot of old school directors that still want to use film, and there are a lot of young directors who actually like using film because it's a different experience, and they don't mind the extra time it takes to send the film off to get processed and come back. So I think if they can afford it, and they're a name kind of director and they like using film, then I think.
Now, in my opinion, I think film is dying out. I hope it doesn't die out completely. But yeah, if cost wasn't an issue, which is still the big problem with film, if it wasn't an issue, I'd happily tomorrow go and film on celluloid. Yeah.
At least it does nothing for me. It does nothing for me. I mean, I actually think I'm getting gypped when I go to a movie and I realize it's either been shot on digital or being projected in digital. I mean, some people feel differently about this, but I think it's the death keel. I think it's the death rattle, and it's. Yeah, I do, and I also have even another whole aspect about it. I've always believed in the magic of movies.
Yeah.
And to me, the magic of movies is connected to 35 millimeter.
We had a problem at ILM doing our effects. We had to convert from film to digital in order to do it. You could save a huge amount of money just by not having to convert anymore. Film is cumbersome, so I just said, I'm going to take my money and my time. I'm going to fix it.
You're not recording movement. You are just taking a series of still pictures. There's no movement in movies at all. They are still pictures. But when shown at 24 frames a second, through a light bulb, it creates the illusion of movement. So thus, as opposed to a recording device, when you're watching a movie, a film print, you are watching an illusion. And to me, that illusion is connected to the magic of movies.
Objections arose about the idea that digital will put an end to the art of cinematography. He pointed out it's just another tool. And this is true.
So what's the conclusion to all of this? Well, to be honest, it comes down to personal choice. If you prefer film, you prefer film. If you prefer digital, you prefer digital. But the way I look at it, if you are just getting into film now and you're learning about movies, then I'd recommend you stay away from film because it's going to die out eventually. By the time you do filming professionally, I don't think it's going to be around anymore. It's a real shame, to be honest.